Does the creator of the universe consider all foods clean? Well, according to the scriptures, he does. But let me first elaborate. Of course, when we look at the scriptures, we see that there are prohibitions about things that should and should not be eaten. For instance, in the book of Genesis, we see man is told not to eat from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. Of course, when he did, there were repercussions. Sin entered into the world, and now man dies. Yahuwah said further in time in the book of Leviticus 11 and Deuteronomy 14 that there were certain animals that should be eaten, and they should be used for food. And there are certain animals that should not be eaten. They should not be used for food. Those which should be eaten and considered food are called clean animals, or animals that are tahor. That means they are pure. They can be used for sacrifice. They can be used on the altar of the Creator. However, those animals which are considered not to be food, they are called tame. They are literally impure. They are unclean. They cannot be used for sacrifice. It's very important. That means if your body is the temple of the Creator of the universe, you should only have those meats which are considered clean to be served on your altar. It should not be those things which the Creator of the universe despises and rejects. Now, many people will argue that the Messiah of Israel deemed all meats in general clean. But is this the truth? Well, before we go into that, which we will examine the full context of his statements regarding this subject, we will look at the context of Scripture starting further towards the beginning. Because you see, you have to understand that the Creator of the universe gave us his instructions. The word instruction in Hebrew is Torah. It has been translated often law. It refers to the books of Genesis through Deuteronomy, which was written within a scroll by the prophet Moshe at Mount Sinai, which is very important. In the context of the volume of that scroll, we see repeated twice the laws for what should be eaten and considered food versus what should not be eaten. We see it in Leviticus chapter 11 and also Deuteronomy chapter 14. Let us look at Leviticus 11 briefly, chapter 11 verse 1. And Yahuwah spoke to Moshe and to Aaron, saying to them, Speak to the children of Israel, saying, These are the living creatures which you do eat among all the beasts that are on the earth. Whatever has a split hoof completely divided, chewing the cud, among the beasts that you do eat. Only these you do not eat among those that chew the cud, or those that have a split hoof. The camel, because it chews the cud, but does not have a split hoof, it is unclean to you. Now, I doubt any of you are going to be eating camel today, but perhaps verse 7 will apply. And the pig, though it has a split hoof, completely divided, yet does not chew the cud, it is unclean to you. Their flesh you do not eat, and their carcasses you do not touch. They are unclean to you. And there's a list here that involves things like rabbits and on and on and on. Anything that falls outside of that spectrum cannot be eaten. So when we talk about those animals which are in the water, the scriptures teach us further that it has to have both fins and scales. This rules out shrimp, the cockroach of the sea, lobster or catfish, or all types of things that people love and adore that come out of the ocean or the bodies of water, clams and mussels, all those types of things. It has to be fish. It has to have both fins and scales. And we see that there's a law for birds, and we see that there are many birds, obviously, that are outlawed that most people don't eat anyway, but people do eat them, such as ostrich and pelican, and even bats are listed, and owls and things like that, ravens, and on and on and on. And there are many laws. You should read the entire chapter of Leviticus 11 and also Deuteronomy 14. But let us go further to verse 44. After Yahuwah gives all the laws, he says this, For I am Yahuwah your Elohim, and you shall set yourselves apart, and you shall be set apart, for I am set apart. Okay, the Hebrew word is kodesh, means to be set apart, pure and special. It has been translated holy. You've probably heard, be ye holy, for I am holy. Well, that word holy has a pagan etymology, but still, that term and that idea comes from this passage. So it's very important to understand that the Creator is saying that we become pure, special, sanctified, set apart, kodesh, by eating the way He is prescribed. And again, remember, Deuteronomy 14 also repeats the list in Leviticus 11. Twice it is repeated to emphasize how important it truly is. It only had to be said once, but the Creator repeats the list 2 distinct times in the same volume of Scripture, the Torah. Now, according to Mark chapter 7, many people, Christians specifically, are saying that the Messiah has made all meats clean. Therefore, the pig is perfectly acceptable, so is shrimp, cockroaches, bats, worms, whatever. Even though they don't really seem to believe the worms and the cockroaches can be eaten, most people don't. Or they'll just, they personally would shun that kind of food because they think it's gross. And it is gross. The Creator of the universe calls it unclean. It's not food. But they would say that all this is now, the Messiah has made all this clean. All this is now clean. And what is this based off of? It's based off of an insertion that has happened in a lot of the English translations, such as the New International Version. Let me give you a little taste of what the New International Version states about the subject in Mark chapter 7. It says, "For it doesn't go into their heart, but into their stomach, and then out of the body." And then in parentheses, in saying this, Jesus declared all foods clean. Okay, well, Jesus was not His name. We all should know that by now. It is becoming common knowledge. We know that the Hebrew Messiah had a Hebrew name. His full name is Yahushua. It means that Yahuwah saves. That's important, very important. But here it's stating that Yahushua has made all foods clean. Well, we know that all food truly is clean. But again, what is being implied by Christians is that this is stating that you can eat all those abominable things now. Did the Messiah say such a thing? Well, you have to understand, first of all, this is inserted into the text. It does not appear in the oldest Greek document, the Codex Sinaiticus. It does not appear in the oldest Aramaic document, the Kobores Codex. So it doesn't appear in any of these ancient manuscripts concerning what Yahushua actually said. And the King James Version actually has it correct, for the most part. The King James Version leaves that parentheses totally out. There's nothing in parentheses here. The King James Version, it just says, "Because it enters not into the heart, but into the belly, and goes out into the drought, and purges all the meats." The only thing I would really say that is wrong here is the term meat should be food. It is the Greek and Aramaic word there. When you look, it is the word for food. It's not the word for meat. But still, it is better than the other versions, which added something to the text. Anytime you have something in parentheses, you have to understand the translator has added this into the text. It does not appear in the base text which they are using. So that is really critical for your scripture studies. Because if you did not know that, you're going to assume when you're reading these really bad English versions, like the New International Version, which is terrible, then you would see this and you'll think, well, that's scripture. That's scripture. And then you're going to quote it to somebody like me who's telling you the opposite. But we're going to know, and now you know, that it does not say that in the King James Version. It does not say that in the oldest Greek or Aramaic version. Let us read the context of Mark chapter 7 to get to the bottom of this mystery. What is the Messiah talking about here? Why is this inserted into the text? And can Christians really use this to validate their eating of things like pork and shellfish? All right, Mark chapter 7, let's read it in verse 1. "And the Pharisees and some of the scribes assembled to him, having come from Jerusalem," that is Jerusalem, "and seeing some of his taught ones eat bread with defiled," that is unwashed, "hands, they found fault. For the Pharisees and all the Yahudim do not eat unless they wash their hands thoroughly, holding fast the tradition of the elders." Now I want you to remember that. The tradition of the elders. "And coming from the marketplace, they do not eat unless they wash. And there are many other traditions which they have received and hold fast, and washing of cups and utensils and copper vessels and couches." Then the Pharisees and scribes asked him Why do your taught ones not walk according to the traditions of the elders, but eat bread with unwashed hands? And he answering said to them, well did Yeshayahu, who is Isaiah, well, he's actually Yeshayahu, he's been called Isaiah, say concerning you, hypocrites, it has been written, this people respect me with their lips, but their heart is far from me. And in vain they do worship me, teaching as teachings the commandments of men. So again, what are we talking about here? The Pharisees have said, why do your students not hold fast the traditions of the elders? Didn't say, why do they not hold fast the laws that were delivered to Moses? The laws of Yahuwah, but rather the traditions. What does Yahushua respond with? A direct example of the prophet Isaiah or Yeshayahu clearly stating that this has been addressed before, that the people of Israel often elevate customs or traditions of men over the commandments of the Creator. And then he says in verse 8, he says, forsaking the command of Elohim, you hold fast the tradition of men. And he said to them, well do you set aside the command of Elohim in order to guard your tradition. Now we're constantly talking about tradition. Now he says, now listen to verse 10. For Moshe said, now that's the contrast. Yahushua is going back to Moses. He's saying, this is what Moshe said from the mouth of Yahuwah. Respect your father and your mother. And he who curses father and mother, let him be put to death. But you say, if a man says to father or mother, whatever profit you have received from me, it is Corban, that is a gift. You no longer let him do any matters at all for his father and his mother, nullifying the word of Elohim through your tradition. So this whole concept is about the traditions, not the commandments. Yahushua is using the commandment to show them their error. He's going back to Moses to point out the mistake. He's not condemning the laws of the Most High anywhere in this place, but only traditions. And it says, nullifying the word of Elohim through your tradition which you have handed down, and many such traditions you do. And calling the crowd to him, he said to him, hear me, everyone, and understand. There is no matter that enters a man from outside which is able to defile him, but it is that which comes out of him that defiles the man. If anyone has ears to hear, let him hear. So he's saying right now, there's something deep that I'm saying here. Listen up, is essentially what he's saying. And when he went from the crowd into a house, his taught ones asked him concerning the parable. Now, we're going to read in Matthew, we'll see clearly in Matthew, that it was not just the disciples, the students, the Talmudim of Yahushua, but specifically Kepha, who's called Peter, who asked about this, which is going to be important also. And he said to them, are you also without understanding? Do you not perceive that whatever enters a man from outside is unable to defile him? Because it does not enter his heart, but through his stomach, and is eliminated, thus purging all foods. See, this is where the New International Version steps in and says that the Messiah has declared all foods are clean. And this is where the other versions step in and it says that he has now declared all food clean, such as the New American Standard Bible and the English Standard Bible. This is where they insert this. But are we talking about meat in the context? Did the Pharisees see Yahushua's disciples eating a pork chop sandwich or anything like that and come and say, hey, why is it that your students disobey Moses and disobey the commands of the Most High? No, 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 no. The Pharisee comes and says, why does your student not regard the tradition of the elders? So this is not about making pork clean. If anything, this is about washing your hands before you eat. And everybody I know who's a Christian does that. And that's a Pharisaic tradition. And yet they will say, well, I'm the Pharisee for saying you have to keep the commandments and eat correctly and eat clean foods. They'll say, oh, that you're like just like the Pharisees. Actually, no, 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 no. You're not even like the Pharisees, because at least the Pharisees didn't sit down and eat pork. Yes, they washed their hands, but most of you do too. So that's the strange thing about the context. The context has nothing to do with meat. It's everything to do with a tradition. And you might say, well, that tradition doesn't apply or affect me at all. Well, during the time and during the age that Yahushua lived in, this was a very, very, very guarded tradition. And it was seen as a very important thing by the Pharisees. And they have many writings in the Talmud and in the Mishnah concerning it. And we'll talk about that in a moment. But first, let's read a little further what Yahushua said. Verse 20. And he said, what comes out of a man, that defiles a man. For from within, out of the heart of men proceed evil reasonings and adulteries and whorings and murders, thefts, greedy desires, wickedness, deceit, indecency, an evil eye, blasphemy, pride, foolishness. All these wicked matters come from within a man to defile a man. And how do we know those are wicked? Because the Torah, the laws, speak against all of those things, like adultery, murder. It tells us these things are wrong. The same laws tell us not to eat pork, not to eat shellfish, not to eat catfish, not to do these things. So, the context of the body of Scripture is talking about washing of hands. So we need to understand a few things. We need to understand that the Torah endorses the idea of immersions, washings, ceremonial washings. These are done in a body of water, a living body of water. It is called a mikvah. A person will be immersed in the mikvah, and they will come out and they will be cleansed. This is in the Torah. This is not a custom. This is not a tradition of man. That is in the Scriptures. Now there is a custom that has been taken from the Scriptures and applied incorrectly, and that is the washing of hands. Yes, the washing of hands is actually in the Torah. We're going to read about that in just a second. Actually, let's go ahead and read about it now. Leviticus chapter 30. Wayikra chapter 30. Leviticus chapter 30 verse 19. And Aaron or Aaron and his son shall wash from it, talking about the bronze laver, with their hands and their feet, when they go into the tent of meeting, or when they come near the altar to attend to burn an offering made by fire to Yahuwah, they wash with water lest they die. And they shall wash their hands and their feet lest they die. And it shall be a law forever to them, to him and his seed throughout their generations. So there's a commandment to wash your hands and feet if you're a son of Aaron and you're serving in the temple. However, this commandment was then later applied to the broader population of Jews by the Pharisees. They put it as a law on all the people. So all people now had to treat their body as the temple, which is okay, it's fine. And when they were going to eat, that would be considered offering and giving an offering, a meat offering. And so therefore they would wash their hands just like the priest would in the temple. And on the surface, that seems like a great tradition. I mean, some people would argue with me and say, no, it sounds terrible, it sounds horrible. What's wicked about washing your hands? Like I said a moment ago, everybody I know washes their hands before they eat. And generally, your peers will look down on you if you don't. So the idea of washing your hands seems to be okay. Why then is Yahushua going against this tradition? Because of the emphasis that has been placed on it, and because of certain things that the Pharisees basically just kind of made up, such as the idea that your hands can be unclean while the rest of your body can be clean. That just your hands coming into contact with certain things renders them unclean. And they were basically using the concepts from the Levitical priesthood and what was going on in the temple to apply that again onto the people. And so basically, if a person had immersed and they were not unclean, they were not in any unclean state, hadn't come into contact with any unclean thing, and they went to the marketplace, by Torah law, they should just be able to eat. They should just be able to eat. They're clean. There's no reason not to. But the Pharisees believed that when you went to the marketplace, because you did not know what the foods had come into contact with, then you should be extra guarded and just consider your hands are unclean. And you have to wash those hands before you eat. Now this is all recorded, again, like I said, in the Talmud. So before we even look at that, let us first talk about the tradition of washing the hands and how it is done. Before one could ritually wash their hands before eating bread, a Jew in this time, they had to make sure their hands were already clean, which is counterproductive, but that's the point, is that this is about ritual and not actually about cleaning the hands. This process is called natiliat yadayim, the washing of hands.
So if we want to put the water on our hands, We want it to cover all the way from our wrist, all the way to the very ends of the fingertips. In order to do that, we're going to need a significant amount of water. So it's good to fill up a nice big cup. If you use a small cup, this is going to be very difficult to do. If you're in a shortage of water, you could follow a more lenient position of covering just simply up to the knuckles. So we do it as follows. You hold the hand this way so that everything is exposed. Your hand is totally exposed to the water. And you pour it twice. Hand is completely covered with water. Then we would take the towel, hold our hands up, and say, Baruch atah Hashem Elokeinu melech olam asher kiddushanu mitzvotav v'tzivanu al netilat yadayim. And then we dry the hands. You do not make a blessing while you're drying your hands. That wouldn't be proper. You should focus on the blessing. You shouldn't make a blessing after you dry your hands, because then it's completely over. Rather, you should make the blessing before you dry your hands. You also try to hold the hands up so that if there is any water, it falls down on your wrist and not the other way around. The water from above your wrist is impure, and you wouldn't want it to fall below the wrist and then to fall on top of the wrist. That would be improper. So we want to keep the hands up when we're drying our hands. You dry them, you remain silent, and then you've accomplished the washing of the hands. This idea that we have an opportunity before we eat bread of washing our hands is really something that in ancient times, this was only for the Kohanim. Those who ate truma, those who ate the holy foods, the gifts that were given to the Kohanim, they had an opportunity to live at this high level of trying to maintain not only pure body, but pure hands as well. And we nowadays have an opportunity every day, every time you wash your hands, to be able to fulfill this concept of living in holiness. Kedoshim to you, to try to be holy. Every person has a chance to be a little bit like a Kohen as we wash our hands ritually before the bread.
The truth is there is no such command given, only to the sons of Aharon and to his descendants. But again, in an effort to preserve those things that were being done in the temple, because of the uncertainty of the times and the Roman occupation, the Pharisees had deemed that the ritual washing of hands should be done by all people within the nation. Women and children were not exempted from the hand washing. We read further in the Babylonian Talmud. We see in Softa 4b, having quoted an allusion from the verse, for on account of a harlot a man is brought to a loaf of bread, which is Proverbs chapter 6:26, the Gemara offers another interpretation of that verse. Rav Avira interpreted a verse homiletically. There were times he said this interpretation in the name of Rabbi Ami. And there were times he said it in the name of Rabbi or Rabbi Asi, concerning anyone who eats bread without washing his hands. It is as if he has engaged in sexual intercourse with a prostitute, as it is stated, for on account of a harlot, a man is brought to a loaf of bread. Now that is a very huge stretch of the verse. Obviously, the interpretation is that the love of prostitution will bring a man down to poverty. It does not mean that a man who eats without washed hands is the same as if he had fornicated with a prostitute. But that is what the rabbis believed. So when Yahushua took his stand against washing the hands after going to the marketplace, this was very controversial, and it had nothing to do with pigs being made clean. It was a very controversial subject. You have to remember, the audience that is being talked to are Jews. They don't eat pigs and stuff like that. They didn't consider what Yahushua was saying to involve those types of things. They knew by the context, and everyone would, that the context he was talking about was specifically about the tradition of washing the hands. When the Pharisees realized that Yahushua wasn't going to endorse this concept, in their mind, it was the same as if you had fornicated with a prostitute, according to the Talmud. The Gemara continues and says this, Rabbi Zarika says that Rabbi Eleazar says, anyone who treats the ritual of washing hands with contempt is going to be uprooted from the world. So that's how important they looked at this tradition. So when Yahushua goes against this tradition, immediately there's going to be anger. There's going to be things that are going to be boiling up within those Pharisees. They're going to be thinking, this man needs to be uprooted from the world. Why? Because the Talmud says so. You know, the Mishnah states a lot of things. The Mishnah states that there are portions of the scriptures that will make the hands unclean. If you use your hands to touch the Aramaic portions that are written in box letter modern Hebrew, which is not even the ancient Paleo-Hebrew, if you touch those, then your hands are rendered unclean. But if you touch a parchment that has the true Hebrew, the Paleo-Hebrew, according to the Mishnah, then your hands aren't aren't made unclean. And there's all these different things that they say. And so for this reason, the Sadducees, who were the sons of Zadok, were actually priests, had contention against the Pharisees in the Mishnah. And they even said, the Sadducees, or the Zadokim, say, we denounce you, Pharisees, for you say that the scriptures render the hands impure, but the books of Homer, the secular books, do not render the hands impure. And the Pharisees responded and said, regarding the sacred scriptures, in accordance with their love is their impurity. And the books of Homer, which are not beloved, do not render the hands impure. So you see there's hypocrisy. There's a major hypocrisy there. And the Zadokim, the Sadducees, knew it. And the Sadducees were also hypocrites as well. They denied the resurrection. They denied there was any kind of malach or messenger, what people call angel, things like that. So there's a lot of different things between the two groups. But this was a hot topic of the day. So this wasn't just something, you know, we're reading this and we want to apply what's the hot topic of today for us. You know, we're thinking, oh, well, how can we make this mean that we can eat, you know, pork and stuff like that? But that's not what is being said. It would not hold in a court of law, that's for sure. If this was your text for explaining to the judge why you broke the law, I'm sorry to tell you that no judge would actually accept this as any kind of legal reason to break the law. And especially the infinite judge, Yahuwah, the creator, who is all wise and all knowing. There's no way you could use this with him. So other times that Jews will wash their hands are in the morning. They will wash their hands after meals. They will wash their hands before dipping the bitter herbs in the salt water on Passover. And there are many other times that they will wash the hands. And these washing of the hands, again, these are all traditions. But it stems from a commandment. And again, you would think that the idea of a tradition based on the commandment is a great thing. I mean, why would it be bad to wash your hands? Like I said, it's not about the concept of washing your hands. You know, I'm sure Yahushua didn't have a problem with people just washing their hands. It's the emphasis that had been placed on it. That when they washed their hands, they said that the creator of the universe gave that commandment. And then that they said that if you wouldn't do it, that it's the same as if you had committed adultery. And they would say that you'd be uprooted from the world. Therefore, Yahushua challenged them on their authority of this statement. Now, what's important is that in Matthew chapter 15, we read that it was Kepha, who's called Peter, who asked about the parable's meaning. And that's going to be important in just a minute. Matthew 15:15, and Kepha answering said to him, explain this parable to us. And Yahushua said, are you still without understanding? Do you not understand that whatever enters into the mouth goes into the stomach and is cast out into the sewer? But what comes out of the mouth comes from the heart, and these defile a man. For out of the heart come forth wicked reasonings, murders, adulteries, whorings, thefts, false witnesses, slanders. These defile the man. But to eat with unwashed hands does not defile the man. Why does it matter that it's Peter, that it's Kepha that asked the question? Because another verse that everyone uses is the vision in Acts chapter 10 that Peter had, that Kepha had, where he saw 3 sheets coming down with all types of unclean and clean animals in the sheet. And the voice said, come, Kepha, slay and eat. And he said, what? Let's read it. Verse 13, and a voice came to him, rise up, Kepha, slay and eat. But Kepha said, not at all, master, because I have never eaten whatever is common or unclean. Wait a minute. Wait a minute. The verse that Christians are using to say that they can eat unclean pigs and shrimp and all these things which is really about washing the hands, it was Kepha who came up to Yahushua and said, Master, what does this mean? What are you saying exactly? And when Yahushua relates to Kepha, he simply says that it's not the things that go into the man, but the things that come out of the man that defile the man, talking about the unwashed hands. So Kepha never got the memo that that meant that he could now eat pork, because if he did, then when the voice said, come, Kepha, slay and eat, he would not have got offended. He would not say, not at all, Master. I have never eaten what is common or unclean. Something common is something that is actually pure, something that was clean, but it's come into contact and been contaminated by something unclean. And that's what's being represented in the idea of the sheet being let down, because all the creatures are in the sheet, squirming inside the sheet together, touching each other, all inside the sheet. So the idea is that they have become tainted also, impure, and therefore they were considered common. So Kepha says this, and then it says in verse 15, and a voice came to him the second time, well, Elohim has cleansed, you do not consider common. Okay, you do not consider common. Now, the interpretation of this is given in verse 28. It says, and he said to them, when he gets to Cornelius's house, because the vision is all about going with these Gentile men and accepting Gentiles who now come into the belief. They are the unclean animals that were being let down from the sheet. Oftentimes in the scriptures, Yahuwah uses unclean animals to represent the nations, such as he did in the book of Daniel, using a lion to represent Babylon, and using a leopard to represent Greece, and a bear to represent Media and Persia, and using a dragon of sorts to represent Rome. And so, this is a very common practice, and this is what it means. And we know this because verse 28 tells us, when he arrives to Cornelius' house, he says to them, you know that a Yehudite man is not allowed to associate with or go to one of another race, but Elohim has shown me that I should not call any man common or unclean. The very next chapter, he has to explain to his Jewish brothers when he returns why he did this. And when he does, he said, I fell into a trance, I had a vision. A sheet came down from the heavens 3 times. I heard a voice say, come, Kepha, slay and eat. And then 3 men were waiting for me downstairs, which were Gentile men. And then he says at the very end that he determined that the Creator was saying not to call any man common. So that's really, really important, because he also says that in every nation, Yahuwah has people who are coming to him. And so the idea is that Kepha had to now associate with these Gentiles. He has to, even though the tradition was, don't associate with those Gentiles, it's bad news. And it was bad news for the Jews. But Yahuwah, that was only a tradition. Yahuwah was calling Kepha to break that tradition and to go with these men and to share the good news of Yahushua with these men. So it's very important. To describe it meaning that Kepha could now eat pork is craziness. Especially, again, when, remember, it was Peter who asked the Messiah what he meant when he said, it is not what goes into the mouth that defiles the man, but what comes out of the heart that defiles the man. So again, remember, if Kepha had got the interpretation, that means that all pork was clean, or that all shellfish are clean, or whatever, he would not have responded, not so, Master. I have never eaten anything common or clean. Now, this subject is a deep subject, so please go and watch a video I have called Peter's Vision is Pork on the Menu. And it will talk about this chapter in exclusive detail. We'll actually go totally verse by verse and read the entire context. So go check that out. Got a couple more verses I want to share with you though before I let you go, because this is really important. 1 Timothy chapter 4 verse 1. But the Spirit distinctly says that in the latter times some shall fall away from the belief, paying attention to misleading spirits and the teaching of demons, speaking lies and hypocrisy, having been branded on their own conscience, forbidding to marry, saying to abstain from foods which Elohim created to be received with thanksgiving by those who believe and know the truth, because every creature of Elohim is good, and none is to be rejected if it is received with thanksgiving, for it is set apart by the word of Elohim and prayer. Now, Christians will say that now in the last days, we're telling them not to eat unclean. So we're the ones who saying abstain from meats and things like that. Okay, is that true? Because we have to read the context. We're not saying to abstain from marriage. That's the Catholic Church and other such Christian cults that do that. That's not something that we endorse. So in the context, obviously, it's not talking about someone who endorses Torah. It's talking about someone who has these cult-like practices of not marrying and abstaining from certain foods. And what foods? It says the foods which Elohim created to be received with thanksgiving. What foods are those? Well, let's read a little further. Because in verse 5 it says, for those foods are set apart by the word of Elohim in prayer. What foods are set apart by the word? What foods were created by Yahuwah to be received with thanksgiving? Was it pork? Was it shellfish? Was it bats? Was it cockroaches? Was it worms? No, no, no. Clean animals were created by the Creator to be received with thanksgiving, and they are set apart by the word and prayer. See, Christians read that and they just think that you say a prayer over a pork chop or something like that, and all of a sudden what happens is somehow it went from being unclean, now it's clean. You just say a prayer. You say a prayer of thanksgiving. That is not how it works. The scripture said that it's set apart by the word of Yahuwah and prayer. So Yahuwah's word has to establish what your food is. What does the word say food is? Well, we've already established it. It's very clear. All right, let's go a little further. 1 Corinthians 10, verse 25. You eat whatever is sold in the marketplace. This is Shaul, Paul talking. People take his words and twist them, just like the book of Peter, Kepha, says that people who are unstable twist his words, twist Shaul or Paul's words to their own destruction. 1 Corinthians 10, 25. You eat whatever is sold in the meat markets, asking no questions because of conscience. Oh, that must mean you go just and buy any type of meat. That's not what it's saying. Let's read the context. For the earth belongs to Yahuwah and all that fills it. And if any of the unbelievers invite you and you do wish to go, you eat whatever is set before you, asking no question on account of the conscience. And if anyone says to you, this was offered to idols, do not eat it because of the one pointing it out to you, and on account of the conscience. For the earth belongs to Yahuwah and all that fills it. So here clearly we see you're not even supposed to eat things that are sacrificed to idols. We know the Torah says that. That's clear. But here we see in the Brit Hadaša, the renewed covenant, that Shaul, who's called Paul, is saying the same thing. You don't eat anything sacrificed to idols. So he's saying in that time when he was doing his journeys through the Roman Empire, that he would go to meat markets, and if there was a piece of meat, well, I mean, obviously he's not going to just start eating pork because it's not even talking about pork. And we see that there's never been a memo or an article written anywhere. There's not even a verse where pork or shellfish or anything like that has been made clean. So we know that that's not the case. He's talking about things sacrificed to idols. So he might go and see a piece of lamb at the meat market. He's not going to walk up to the guy and say, hey, was this offered to an idol? He will only not eat it if it's obvious, because otherwise he was probably going to starve, you know. So the point is that, you know, somebody points it out, you don't eat it. But you don't have to go and ask every single person regards to it. But it's not talking about eating unclean things. Acts 15 also gives us some information. Acts 15, verse 19, it says, therefore I judge that we should not trouble those amongst the nations, the Gentiles, who are turning to Elohim, but we write to them to abstain from the defilements of idols, and from whoring, and from what is strangled, and from blood. So you're not supposed to eat blood either. I know a lot of Christians that eat bloody steaks. You're not supposed to eat blood. The scriptures tell us that. You're not supposed to do these things. You don't eat things that are sacrificed to idols. It says in verse 21, for from ancient generations, Moshe has in every city those proclaiming him, being read in the congregations every Sabbath. Now, in the book of Romans chapter 14, we read, therefore, let us not judge one another any longer, but rather judge this, not to put an obstacle or stumbling block in our brother's way. I know and am persuaded in the Master Yahushua that none at all in of itself is common. Now your version might say unclean. That's the wrong word. Look it up. In the Greek and Aramaic, this should say common. That none at all is common in of itself, but to him who regards whatever to be common, to him it is common. And if your brother is grieved because of your food, you are no longer walking in love. Do not by your food ruin the one for whom Messiah died. Yet Christians will have full-fledged barbecues where they cook swine, a full pig, on an altar almost, this full thing, or they'll cook them. And you ask, and I've asked before, what if Jews wanted to come to your congregation, learn about the Messiah? And basically the answer is we don't really care about those Jews. We don't really care about any of those people that keep the law at all. That's essentially what the response is. It might be said a little nicer than that. But the point is that that's the general consensus. The general consensus is we don't care about you. But what does Shaul say? If my food is going to make somebody stumble, I won't even eat. He says, if your food is making your brother stumble, it's you, the one who's eating, that's not acting in love. Now, I'll give you an analogy. Let's say we go out to a restaurant. I go, I use the restroom. You walk in as well. You see that I did not wash my hands as I exit the restroom. We go to sit down. Now, I'm eating a piece of lamb. You're eating pork chop. Now, you're going to look at me and think that what I've just done is disgusting because I did not wash my hands. But yet the creator of the universe has told you not to defile yourself with unclean meat. And you, because of traditions, would look down on me for not washing my hands. Now, don't get me wrong, I wash my hands. I think that that's appropriate. It makes sense. The scriptures don't say that Yahushua didn't wash his hands after he used the restroom. It says that he specifically did this basically to challenge the Pharisees. That's essentially what we should all assume. So, but the idea is the hypocrisy involved. The mass hypocrisy. Every time you go and wash your hands in a bathroom before you eat, you're basically doing one of the same traditions that Pharisees do. So how is it that I'm the Pharisee and you're not? That's the thing that I don't understand. It's so strange to me. People they pick and choose what customs and traditions they choose to accept, and they pick and choose how they will interpret the scriptures. That's the beauty about context. That's the reason I read a lot of scripture when I do these types of presentations. Now, one more verse from Shaul real quick. Ephesians chapter 5, verse 5. For this you know, that no one who whores nor is unclean, nor one greedy of gain or an adulterer has any inheritance in the reign of Messiah and Elohim. Let no one deceive you with empty words, for because of these the wrath of Elohim comes upon the sons of disobedience. Because of what? Because of these. What are these? Well, let's read it one more time. For this you know, that no one who whores nor an unclean one. How do you become unclean? How does a human being become unclean? By defiling themselves with unclean things. Remember, Yahushua cast demons into swine. That is because the demons are unclean spirits. The swine are unclean vessels. When you eat this unclean vessel, this contaminates you. It makes you unclean. The scriptures tell us that clearly. Yahushua was not talking about that fact. He was talking about hand washings. It's very clear. You can't just manipulate the scriptures to just mean anything. Otherwise, what does it? Where is the official interpretation? And that's what a lot of these spiritual leaders like about the scriptures, that they can take a little piece here and a little piece there and splice it together and make it say something it never said before, and they can create all types of cults that way and get millions of followers, and they'll never be called a cult because they got all that money coming in and it looks so official. And that's all it is. But it's the same thing. It says, because of these, the unclean ones, the adulterers, the idol worshippers, because of these, the wrath of Yahuwah is coming upon the sons of disobedience. Isaiah 66 verse 15 tells us about that wrath. For look, Yahuwah comes with fire and with his chariots, like whirlwinds, to render his displeasure with burning and with his rebuke with flames of fire. For by fire and by his sword Yahuwah shall judge all flesh, and the slain of Yahuwah shall be many. Those who set themselves apart and cleanse themselves in the gardens after one in the midst, who eat flesh of pigs, and the abomination and the mouse are snatched away together, declares Yahuwah. In the future, Yahuwah's wrath is coming upon those who defile themselves with pig. Now, I know that you've heard that you can eat it, and I know that you think that the scriptures endorse it, but we've gone through all the information here, and there's really no two ways about it. Yahushua has said when he came on the scene, my doctrine is not my own, but it is the doctrine or the teaching of him who sent me. That is what he said every time. He said when he was conquering Satan in arguments, he said, "It is written, it is written, it is written." Every time he spoke to the Pharisees, how did he respond? It is written. He always went with the written word of Yahuwah, and he only condemned the traditions that they had elevated to the status of commandments, and they were just traditions of men. Jews wash their hands like this to this very day, and when they do it, they say that the creator of the universe has given them this commandment. They understand when they read the context what the argument is about. But Christians still think this is about, unclean meats. But it's not. And if you continue to think so, it's because you just have chosen to believe something that is not in the scriptures. I invite you to please go and watch that other video. Peter's vision is pork on the menu. And check out our other videos. I have several videos on the name of the Creator. The Creator's name is Yahuwah. His Son is Yahushua. I appreciate you watching this presentation, and I hope and pray you'll share it with your friends and your family, because it is very important and very critical, because the wrath of Yahuwah that we read about here is coming very soon.